Imagine you're walking down the hallway of a university building on, say, the very first day of the semester.
Right, high energy everywhere.
Exactly. And you peek into two different classrooms. We'll call them Classroom A and Classroom B. So in Classroom A, the instructor's up at the front, and they are delivering this truly engaging lecture. I mean, the students look really attentive.
They're probably taking notes, nodding along.
Yeah, nodding. And every now and then the instructor asks a question, the student raises their hand and answers it perfectly. When the bell rings, everyone packs up feeling great. It just feels like a really solid, successful class.
Sounds like the dream scenario for a lot of faculty, honestly.
Right. But then you walk next door to Classroom B. Now, this instructor has just handed the students a really complex problem related to the day's topic. The students are all in small groups. They're debating potential solutions, comparing evidence, questioning each other.
Let me guess, it's loud.
It is so loud. And it's unpredictable. The instructor is circulating through the room, offering a little guidance here and there, but definitely not just giving away the answers. Frankly, looking in from the hallway, Classroom B seems a little bit uncomfortable, chaotic even.
Yeah, I know that room well.
So the core question we want to ask you today is this: which of these two classrooms is more likely to produce meaningful learning?
That is the big question.
We are posing this thought experiment today because you're joining us from the Teal Professional Development course, Technology Enhanced Active Learning, and you had some choices for this module.
Right, some of your colleagues are probably doing the guided reading right now.
Yeah, or maybe they chose the interactive video.
Yeah.
But you chose this audio deep dive. So wherever you are right now, whether you're commuting, walking the dog, maybe at the gym,
Sure.
We just want you to treat this as a collegial coffee chat. Just a conversation before you take these insights back to your colleagues for the online discussion.
I love that. And returning to that thought experiment about Classroom A and Classroom B, I mean, it's a brilliant place to start because it immediately exposes this trap that so many of us in higher ed fall into.
Oh, it is absolutely a trap. I mean, the immediate instinct for a lot of faculty who know the buzzwords is to say, well, Classroom B is active learning and Classroom A is traditional lecture, so Classroom B is obviously better.
Right, it's the active one.
Exactly. But relying on our gut feeling about Classroom B looking all busy and chaotic, that isn't enough when we're talking about redesigning entire courses. Appearances can be incredibly deceiving.
Oh, totally. You can have students in a group who look incredibly busy. They're talking, they're moving around, writing on whiteboards, but they are doing absolutely no meaningful thinking about the actual course content. They're just organizing who's going to write what on the poster.
Yes, or just chatting about their weekend. And on the flip side, a really well-crafted lecture can actually contain profound moments of active learning.
I mean, an instructor might just pause, right, and ask a rhetorical question that requires the students to silently retrieve previous knowledge, or maybe evaluate a piece of evidence in real time.
Exactly. They might mentally revise a misconception right there in their seats in total silence. So it's really not about what they are doing physically. It is entirely about what they are doing mentally.
That is the key distinction.
And that distinction is the driving force behind this deep dive today. We really need to cut through the buzzwords, look at the hard data behind active learning, and figure out how to actually translate those mechanisms into your own course design.
Well, to do that, we have to talk about a monumental piece of educational research. I mean, if we're looking at hard data, we have to talk about Scott Freeman's work.
Oh, absolutely. The 2014 study.
Right. So in 2014, Scott Freeman and his colleagues published this massive meta-analysis. They synthesized 225 independent investigations.
225. That's not a small sample size.
Not at all. And these studies specifically compared traditional lecture-based instruction to active learning, mostly across undergraduate STEM courses, so science, technology, engineering, and math.
When I first looked at Freeman's data, which, by the way, involved thousands upon thousands of students across all these different disciplines and institutions, the data point that stopped me in my tracks wasn't just like a slight bump in exam score.
No, the exam scores went up, but that wasn't the headline.
The headline was the failure rates. Students in the traditional lecture courses were approximately 1.5 times more likely to fail compared to the students in the active learning courses.
Yeah.
A 1.5 times higher chance of failing simply because of the instructional method.
Yeah.
That is staggering.
It is staggering. In fact, the outcomes were so stark that the researchers actually framed it through the lens of a clinical medical trial.
Oh, right, the Institutional Review Board comparison.
Exactly. They pointed out that if you were testing two different treatments for a disease, right? And the traditional treatment yielded a 1.5 times higher failure rate than the new treatment, the medical review board would likely halt the experiment early.
Because it would be unethical.
Right. You couldn't ethically justify keeping that control group in the traditional lecture setting when the alternative is so clearly superior.
Wow. And Freeman actually expanded on that medical analogy later, didn't he? And it caused quite a stir in academia.
Oh, it ruffled some feathers for sure. He compared the impact of this 2014 data to the famous 1964 Surgeon General's report on smoking and health.
Yeah. And at first glance, that feels almost, aggressive. Like you're telling faculty that their lecturing is a health hazard to their students.
Right, like lecturing is literally giving students lung cancer.
Exactly. But when you really analyze the context of that comparison, he wasn't making a moral judgment on the act of lecturing itself.
Not at all. The 1964 Surgeon General's report is used as an analogy because of the sheer weight of the evidence. I mean, before 1964, there was a legitimate ongoing debate about whether smoking was actually harmful.
People genuinely didn't know for sure.
Right, but after that report came out, the debate effectively ended. The evidence was just undeniable. Freeman was arguing that the 2014 meta-analysis serves as our educational watershed moment.
So the debate shouldn't be about whether active learning is more effective than lecturing anymore. Like, the evidence is in. The conversation needs to fundamentally shift to how we implement it effectively.
Exactly. We have to move past the does it work phase.
And here's where I get hung up. If this watershed moment happened over a decade ago, why am I still walking past these massive stadium seating lecture halls where 300 students are just passively listening for 90 minutes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that paradox speaks so much to the culture of higher education.
It's slow to change.
Yeah. Very slow. Redesigning a course requires a massive investment of time, and faculty are chronically short on time. Plus, you have structural limitations. Like those stadium seating halls you just mentioned, they make alternative formats physically really difficult.
You can't easily turn those bolted down chairs into small discussion circles.
Exactly. But a major, often overlooked barrier is simply our own comfort zones. The vast majority of us who teach in higher ed were taught via traditional lecture.
Right.
So is just the mental model we default to. It's what feels like real teaching.
I would argue there is another massive barrier, too, and it goes right back to that illusion of busyness we talked about in our opening thought experiment with Classroom B.
The chaotic room.
Yeah. The resistance often stems from a fundamental misconception about what active learning actually is. People hear the term active learning, and they think it means doing literally anything other than lecturing.
Right. They think it's throwing students into unstructured groups or playing a board game or having them tap a button on a polling app.
Yes, and that illusion is dangerous because it gives the instructor this false sense of security. You see movement, you hear noise, and you just assume, oh, learning is happening.
But learning doesn't happen in the muscles, it happens in the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Herbert Simon. He was a pioneering educational psychologist, and he made this observation decades ago that serves as the absolute bedrock of learning science. Simon said, and this is a quote, "Learning results from what the student does and thinks."
It sounds deceptively simple, doesn't it?
It really does.
But it implies that the instructor cannot do the learning for the student. No matter how brilliant, how engaging, how perfectly crafted your delivery of the content is.
You can't put the knowledge inside their head for them.
Right. Active learning isn't about physical movement. It's about mental friction. It's about placing the student in a position where their brain has to do the heavy lifting.
I like to think about it like forging a path through a really dense forest. If you, as the instructor, walk ahead and pave a perfectly smooth road, the student can just stroll down it effortlessly.
And that's the feeling of a great, entertaining lecture. It feels really smooth.
Exactly. But neurologically, if the student hasn't struggled to clear the brush themselves, they haven't built the neural pathways required to navigate that forest again when you aren't there to guide them. We have to force them off the paved road.
Which leads us to a much more precise working definition of active learning.
Let's hear it.
It is an instructional approach in which students actively construct understanding rather than primarily receiving information from an instructor. They are retrieving information, discussing it, analyzing evidence, applying concepts to novel situations, evaluating, creating, and solving problems.
Notice that passively listening is entirely absent from that list of actions.
Entirely absent.
Now, if you, our listener, have been working through the earlier modules of this Peel course, those concepts, retrieving, applying, evaluating, those are the crucial links tying everything together.
Right. This is where all those dots connect.
Let's dig into the cognitive psychology behind the evidence-based strategies you explored earlier in Teal, and examine how active learning is really the framework that powers them. We can start with retrieval practice.
Yeah, retrieval practice is foundational. This is the act of asking students to reconstruct knowledge from memory rather than just reviewing their notes or, flipping to the glossary in the textbook.
And the mechanism behind why retrieval works is fascinating. When a student just rereads a text, they are largely firing visual and recognition pathways in the brain. It feels familiar, so they assume, oh, I know this.
The illusion of fluency.
Exactly. But when you ask them a question and force them to pull the answer from memory without looking, they have to fire the access pathway. That productive struggle, that mental friction of trying to remember, literally alters the neural architecture. The brain registers the effort and says, oh, this is important enough to keep.
And that connects directly to spaced practice, which is revisiting important concepts over time rather than just cramming them all into a single one-week module.
Right, because of the forgetting curve. If we learn something once, the neural connection begins to decay almost immediately.
It's just how human memory works.
Yeah. So spaced practice forces the brain to re-access that network just as it's starting to fade. By designing a course where, say, a concept from week 2 is suddenly necessary to solve a problem in week 7, you are forcing the student to reconsolidate that memory. They are actively constructing their understanding all over again right when it matters most.
It's so powerful. And we also explored interleaving in the course. Instead of giving a student 20 of the exact same type of math problem or chemistry equations in a row, you mix up the problem types.
I love interleaving because it targets a very specific cognitive skill discrimination. Like if I do 20 identical statistics problems, by problem 4, I'm just using muscle memory.
You're not even reading the prompt anymore.
Exactly. I'm not thinking. I'm just executing a procedure. But if you interleave a t-test problem with an ANOVA problem and then a regression problem, I can't just run on autopilot. I have to stop, evaluate the raw material, and determine which strategy actually applies here. That is the essence of active learning. I am analyzing and evaluating, not just repeating.
It forces that mental friction. Finally, we need to view Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, through this exact same lens. The core philosophy of UDL is removing unnecessary barriers to learning, whether they are physical, cognitive, or structural.
And this is where cognitive load theory becomes so critical. Working memory is strictly finite. If a student is spending all their mental energy just trying to parse an overly complicated assignment prompt or struggling to access a poorly formatted PDF,
What we call extraneous cognitive load.
right, extraneous load, if they're dealing with that, they have no working memory left for the actual content. UDL lowers that extraneous load. But crucially, it preserves the germane load.
It keeps the mental friction that we actually want.
Yes. You remove the obstacles preventing access so the student can spend all of their energy on the productive struggle of learning the material.
To ground all of this in reality, we can actually look at an example from this very Teal module.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so some of your colleagues chose to engage with this material by reading a text document and completing an annotation assignment. Now, reading a text is traditionally thought of as a highly passive activity.
Oh, we've all seen it. The eyes track across the page. Maybe a highlighter marks a sentence or two in bright yellow. But the brain isn't actually processing the meaning.
Right, just coloring the page.
Yeah. But look at how this specific assignment in Teal was designed to shift the cognitive load. The participants weren't just asked to read. They were asked to use a pin drop annotation tool to comment on specific prompts embedded throughout the text.
They were prompted to question the ideas presented, identify the evidence the author was using, and connect the reading to their own personal teaching experiences.
They were engaging in a dialogue.
Exactly, a dialogue with the author and with their peers.
By structuring it that way, the reading completely ceases to be about just receiving information. The assignment forces retrieval, evaluation, and creation. The student takes the raw material of the text and actively constructs a mental model.
It's a completely different cognitive experience.
It is so much more effective than just writing read chapter 4 on your syllabus. You're intentionally designing an environment that requires them to think.
What becomes clear through all these examples, whether it's an annotation tool, an interleaved quiz, or a spaced problem set, is that active learning is fundamentally about intentional design.
Yes.
You don't necessarily have to throw out your entire syllabus or turn your classroom into a chaotic debate hall like Classroom B. It's about evaluating your current materials and asking, where can I insert a moment that shifts the cognitive heavy lifting from me to the students?
As we wrap up this conversation, the major takeaway for you, our listener, is that adopting active learning doesn't mean banishing the lecture completely, and it definitely doesn't mean defaulting to physical busyness just for the sake of it.
Right, no busy work.
It is about honoring Herbert Simon's observation learning. Learning only results from what the student does and thinks.
We really encourage you to take these insights directly into your Teal online discussion. Bring up the Freeman data on failure rates. See what your colleagues think about that Surgeon General analogy.
Yeah, discuss the difference between appearing busy and being cognitively engaged. Share your thoughts, challenge your peers, and explore what this mental friction actually looks like in your specific discipline.
Because it will look different in a biology lab versus a literature seminar.
Absolutely. But before you log into that discussion, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you finish your walk or your commute or whatever you're doing right now.
Think back to those 2 classrooms from our opening experiment.
Right. The instructor in Classroom A held all the cards, didn't they? They controlled every single second of the content delivery. But the instructor in Classroom B stepped back and forced the students to grapple with the material themselves. If learning truly only results from what the student does and thinks, how does stepping out of the spotlight and relinquishing total control over content delivery actually give you, the instructor, more power over your students' ultimate success?